Hello, and welcome to the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. My name is Claudia Rizzini. I'm the Executive Director of the Fellowship Program. We have organized this application workshop to provide an overview of the application process and highlight important aspects of the application. Here is our agenda for today. We will begin the program with a 2-minute introduction to the Harvard Radcliffe Fellowship. I'll then hand over to Professor Jennifer Lerner and Professor Lisa Diller, who are 2 former Radcliffe Fellows. They will tell you a little bit about their experience as fellows and what the fellowship meant to them in their careers. Jennifer will then speak about the application and how to complete it in such a way that it is competitive. Following that, Lisa will describe briefly our selection process. Finally, we will have some time for Q&A. Please use the Q&A feature on Zoom to submit your questions at any time throughout the program. We ask that you keep your questions brief to allow us to address as many as possible in the time that we have together. We will reply to all unanswered questions in writing over the next few days. Please know that there is also a lot of information available in our FAQ page on the Radcliffe website. So let's get started. What is the application for? It is to become a fellow at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. The Institute selects 50 fellows each year. Radcliffe Fellows are exceptional scientists, writers, scholars, public intellectuals, practitioners, and artists whose work is making a difference in their professional field and in the larger world. Fellows come to Radcliffe from September to May. During that time, they join a uniquely interdisciplinary and creative community based in Radcliffe Yard, a sanctuary in the heart of Harvard University. Over the course of the week, fellows are asked to present their projects at private talks to other fellows or to a wider audience at public talks. Both types of talks are followed by Q&A and group discussions. The fellowship also offers professional development training sessions, such as how to give good presentations, how to interact with publishers, and much more. In short, a fellowship at Radcliffe is an opportunity to step away from usual routines and dive deeply into a project. At Radcliffe, fellows have the opportunity to work with Harvard students by participating in the Radcliffe Research Partnership Program. In this program, Harvard students engage with the fellows and their projects by researching sources, reviewing book chapters, discussing new approaches to the project. And now some information about financial support. For the 2021-2022 academic year, fellows will receive a stipend of $78,000 plus an additional $5,000 to cover project expenses. Additionally, the Institute offers an allowance for relocation, for moving, housing, and childcare. And now I want to welcome Professor Jennifer Lerner and Professor Lisa Diller. Jennifer and Lisa will introduce themselves and tell us a little about their experience as Radcliffe Fellows. So let's start with Jennifer. Jen, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Lerner. I am a professor at Harvard. My primary appointment is in the Harvard Kennedy School, where I'm a professor of public policy and decision science. My work is at the intersection of psychology and economics. And I also hold an appointment, a secondary appointment in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences within the psychology department. My Radcliffe Fellowship was about a decade ago, and yet it has remained a very significant event in my intellectual life. It's one of the peak experiences of my career, and I've been a tenured professor at Harvard for 14 years. So it really stands out as a high point. While I was there, I did take advantage of working with undergrads, as you heard Claudia describe. And while undergraduates are plentiful on many campuses, the Radcliffe program is so well designed in terms of matching you with undergrads that it works exceptionally well. And I went on to publish a paper with one of the two main undergrads that worked with me. I also got to participate in many interdisciplinary kinds of conversations and ultimately projects than I otherwise would have. So for example, one of my main areas of research is emotion and decision-making, and I was able to partner with one of the faculty members from the Harvard Medical School to work on health decision-making, and in particular, palliative care, led to a grant proposal, to projects, et cetera. So there, when Radcliffe says this is an interdisciplinary setting, they really mean it. We really do work together. And let me hand it over to Professor Diller so she can introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Diller. I'm a professor of pediatrics at the Harvard Medical School. I specialize in pediatric oncology and have spent my entire career really at one institution, the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston Children's Hospital, taking care of children with cancer. My year was more recent. I was a fellow in the Radcliffe program for the 2018-19 year. And it gave me an opportunity to sort of take a turn, a slight segue from what I had worked on from a research perspective for many years, and to learn about, become expert in a emerging field in pediatric cancer, personalized medicine, which you've probably heard about, and personalized oncology, and really allowed me to both self-inform and instruct around the genetics of pediatric cancer and how children would be at risk for cancer based upon genetics. This was a new area of interest of mine. I developed new collaborations because of it. I worked with Harvard undergraduates through the Research Partners Program, who helped me with my projects, both data abstraction as well as development of an app, which I would not have had the capability to do, but one of my Radcliffe partner students knew how to do a web-based app, which I developed and is now in use in the hospital. And I went back to my work after that year with a new area of expertise, publications in the field, and grant proposals ongoing. It was a wonderful year. I hope we have some more time later to talk more about it, but for now, I'll pass the mic back to Claudia.
Thank you both so much, Jen and Lisa. We will now hear from Professor Lerner regarding the application process, and following that, Professor Diller will speak about the selection process. Jennifer, the floor is yours again.
Thanks very much, Claudia. So I have had the privilege of working behind the scenes, reviewing applications for the Radcliffe Fellowship in multiple years, and being part of the final selection committee, and also to a certain extent in helping, because I study judgment and decision making, helping the Radcliffe team to optimize their selection process. And so in reviewing this application process, I'm trying to draw on some of the things I've learned through those various experiences. That said, I do want to emphasize that the Radcliffe leadership and staff are the true experts. So if anything I say today is unclear, or if I don't know the answer, please do follow up with the Radcliffe team. The first thing that you need to know about the application is that at Radcliffe, we really process the applications in two different groups, and those two groups have different deadlines. So the first thing to figure out is whether your application fits within the humanities, social sciences, practitioners, and creative arts. That's one group. Or if it fits better with science, engineering, and mathematics. There are some fields that could potentially straddle either approach. And if you're in such a field, conferring with the Radcliffe team is the best thing to do. But that's something to do very early on, because the deadlines, as you can see, are not that far in the future, and they do differ. Next, please. So beyond those two overarching buckets, within the buckets, there are also some key distinctions. So the eligibility varies depending on what your specific field is. And within the humanities and social sciences, the key eligibility criteria are, first of all, having a doctorate, and that you have completed it at least 2 years prior to being a fellow. So it's important to emphasize the Radcliffe Fellowship is not a postdoctoral fellowship. It's really meant for people who are beyond that phase of their careers. And in the humanities or social sciences, it's important to have published at least a monograph or at least 2 articles in refereed journals or edited collections. And of course, because there are so many different fields across the humanities and social sciences, the norms within those fields for publishing will differ. So these are minimal criteria for eligibility. Within science, engineering, and mathematics, again, of course, the doctorate is a requirement, and at least 2 years prior to being a fellow. And here, there's a minimum eligibility criterion of having published at least 5 articles in refereed journals. And again, we emphasize that this is not a postdoc. Next, please. The 2 other categories that differ in terms of eligibility are the creative arts and if you're applying as a practitioner. So within the creative arts, there are discipline-specific eligibility requirements, and all of these are detailed on the Radcliffe website. And please notice that the doctorate or a master's in fine arts are not required within the creative arts, so it's quite different. And turning to practitioners, the final group that has different eligibility criteria, Radcliffe asks for at least 10 years of relevant professional experience, and Radcliffe welcomes applications from all walks of life, and they really do mean that. So NGOs, government organizations, professionals as examples. The important thing is that you are a recognized, acknowledged leader in your field, and that you have proposed a writing project. So even if you are working as a practitioner in a field where writing is not your primary work, the important thing for applying to a Radcliffe Fellowship is that you would produce a written project during your fellowship. Next slide, please. So I want to start off right off the bat before we go into details about how to craft a great application to just highlight some pitfalls. It breaks our heart in reviewing applications when we see that people have put in a lot of work but missed something important. And so please keep these in mind. First of all, look at the specific criteria that we just reviewed together for your particular field, because if yours is one that requires a PhD, your application cannot be reviewed if you don't have one. So please, I know it can be a little complicated because the criteria differ by category. So just make double sure that you are clear on what your category requires. And for example, in the arts, there are field-specific requirements that are important to pay attention to. Also, missing supporting materials, because there are so many applications to Radcliffe, it's really a tremendous number, and there's only room for a small set to actually be admitted. There is no re-review process. So if you are missing required supporting materials, then your proposal can't be reviewed within that. So please make sure that you are good on all those things. And of course, late submission is another hard deadline. And then lastly, although all we former fellows wish we could reapply, we are not eligible once we've had the wonderful experience of being a fellow. Next, please. So I'm going to overview what the application materials include and then give some tips on each part. So first of all, there is an application form, and I put here in parentheses important. sometimes we think of forms as just sort of the cover to the actual proposal, and we think maybe only the actual proposal would matter. But that is not the case here. Having sat in many rooms reviewing and discussing these applications, what you put on the form is very much considered. And in fact, as you might expect, it creates the initial impression that reviewers have of your proposal. And so there are questions on the form, like what most appeals to you about being a Radcliffe Fellow. Please think deeply about this. We sometimes see applications that say, well, I like an interdisciplinary atmosphere. And because there are hundreds and hundreds of people applying for that same spot, the ones that are giving a much more thoughtful response than that are going to have a higher score. Another question that appears there is what a successful year at Radcliffe would look like for you. And so you could imagine one could answer that by saying, well, I'd be productive because I'd be free from other responsibilities. And sure, that's true, but how are you going to differentiate your application from all of the others that are also saying that same thing? So help your application rise to the top by taking every question on the form seriously and think deeply about it. The other things besides the form are a special short curriculum vitae, which we'll say more about in a minute, your project proposal, a writing or work sample, and 3 letters of recommendation. Let me say a little more in depth about each of these. Next slide, please. So starting with the CV. First of all, because there are so many applicants, the reviewers can only review a short CV. So this is your chance to pack into 6 pages whatever best speaks to your capabilities and what makes your project a great fit for Radcliffe. So please do not just truncate off the final pages of your CV, but instead pay close attention to making sure that those 6 pages speak really well to what it is you propose to do and how you are qualified to do them. Along those lines, you want to put your most important publications and achievements. And this is really crucial because every review committee, you do go through a discipline-specific process, but ultimately there is an interdisciplinary review committee. And so people in one field may not know what is a peer-reviewed publication in another field. So it's crucial to make that clear. Next, please. And in your project proposal, there's an opportunity to give an overview. This is another aspect of the application where one might think, oh, I can go quickly over this, but please do not. Each part is very important. And so details on the format matter. And it's important to only do one project per applicant. So if you're thinking about several different things, please do not list several different things. Choose whichever you think is best. And of course, stay within the word limit. Next, please. And as I alluded to a minute ago, the project piece starts out with an abstract. And the Radcliffe folks really do pay attention to things like if you stick within the 150-word limit. And of course, they do that out of fairness, so that every project gets an equal shot at gaining a spot. As I mentioned, there are going to be interdisciplinary teams reviewing your proposal as well as discipline-specific teams. And so it's crucial to write for an educated audience so that any educated person in any discipline would be able to understand what it is you propose to do. You are free to design the abstract according to your preferred format, but here is one you could consider using. And you don't have to write it all down right now because the webinar contents will be available for you to watch later. But essentially starting out with an introduction to the field, then describing the project, going on to the material, the sources, the archives, etc., and a broader perspective. Next, please. The main body of your proposal, crucially important for obvious reasons. Your goal is to describe the project and then explain the significance of the topic, not just to people in your field, but to a broader educated audience. Think New York Times reader is who you are writing for. At the same time that you're writing for that broad level understanding, you of course need to write the work in the context of your discipline. So how does what you're going to study represent a frontier, a new breakthrough, filling in a gap, any of those things? And explain how it would add to the discipline. Really important to include the theory and the methodology. So the project will be evaluated. Sometimes there's a great theory, but it's unclear to reviewers how exactly you're going to go about doing what you propose. And then it's hard to give full points to that project, or vice versa. A lot of methodological detail without telling us as reviewers how it adds up. And of course, cite the work of others. We don't want you to make it seem like you are the star of the show. We understand that work is cumulative, and we do want to see that you are properly contextualized and building upon relevant literature. Next, please. It's also important to let us know the status. The ideal status is that you have collected your data and or done the work you need to do in the field, and now you are ready to write about it. However, Radcliffe has some flexibility. If you say that you want to be in residence at Radcliffe and then you propose that you're going to be far away across the world collecting data, that is a potential problem there and one to think about. And of course, you want it to be original, well-conceived, etc. There are special considerations if the project has some practical value. How is it going to make the world a better place? And so please put that in your project. Next, please. Writing or work sample. A lot of this is very straightforward and detailed on the website. You want it to be in English. It ideally should be relevant to the work you propose. However, if it's a situation where you're starting in a new direction in your work, of course, say that and explain. Give reviewers the understanding for why you've chose the pieces you've chosen. And if it's co-authored, it's crucial to indicate what your role on the project was. Next, please. Letters of recommendation. This is not as straightforward as it might seem. So it's really important to talk to your reviewers ahead of time so that they don't just rattle off the same letter that they would write if you were applying for a professorship position or a practitioner position that they had on file. It's really better if they can write a letter suited to the Radcliffe Fellowship, because the letter ideally would speak not only to your core competency, but also whether your work is suited to the Radcliffe Fellowship environment and whether you yourself are someone who likes to be in an intellectual community versus someone who would prefer to stay in your own office by yourself. And if you're the latter, probably the Radcliffe environment is not necessarily one that you would thrive in, because this is truly an intellectual community. And then, of course, there are some guidelines you can find on the website about who the letter writers can be. Next, please. Okay, so that's a brief overview of the components. Again, all of the details are right there for you on the website. That was my attempt to give you some of the inside reflections from being on the reviewer side. And now I'm going to hand it over to Professor Diller.
Thank you, Jen. As you can tell from Jen's presentation, there are many different aspects that your application will cover, and those will be reviewed by a two-tiered selection process. Before entering into this two-tiered selection process, some applications are actually eliminated based upon some of the objective eligibility criteria that Jen talked about. So if a person's application has a 20-page CV and a 300-word project summary, that project might be, or that applicant might be eliminated before they even enter into this two-tiered selection process, or if the person was a former Radcliffe Fellow, for example. I've been involved in the second phase, the multidisciplinary final selection committee phase. Before that phase is a real deep review by experts in the relevant field. Many of the reviewers are former Radcliffe Fellows, but many are not. And the readers will be in the field that you self-designate. So mathematicians will be reviewed by mathematicians, and humanities will be reviewed by humanities experts, for example. They may not be exactly the same field, but they will be in the same general vicinity. Whereas the multidisciplinary final selection committee is more multidisciplinary. For example, as a physician, I serve on the science multidisciplinary committee, where we also review mathematics and physics. And there are mathematicians and physicists who serve on that committee as well. Next slide, please. The applicants are evaluated on two major factors. One, the project, and the other, the applicant, his or herself. The applications are evaluated on the basis of the quality and the significance of the proposed project. And the project proposals should be original, should be well conceived and developed, should be accurately described, should be feasible with the scope of what happens at Radcliffe, that it's a September to May program. It's not a 5-year project. And that they should be relevant to practical changes in society. Next slide, please. We also very carefully look at the applicants themselves. We're inviting applicants to join a multidisciplinary committee environment, sorry. And so the applicant is looked at for their collegiality and openness to cross-disciplinary conversation. They're looked at in terms of their intellectual and creative capacity. Of course, their record of achievement relative to career stage. Many of my co-fellows were leaders in their field at the stage that they were in. We also look at diversity along every dimension of diversity and value creating a class that represents the diversity of the world community of scholars. Next slide. Next up are tips for success. Next slide. I'd like to talk a little bit about things that Jen also talked about, which were some of the pitfalls that people fall into that really kind of shoot themselves in the foot in terms of putting together an application. Spelling, punctuation, grammar, following the guidelines for writing a proposal, using the correct font size, for example, answering every question fully, and then very importantly, choose referees, letter writers that you can rely upon to submit the letters on time, and people who you can brief on your project and on Radcliffe and the Radcliffe experience so that they write a letter that's tailored to that project as well as what to expect at Radcliffe. The committees that look at these applications use the letters, rely on the letters very heavily to understand from people within the field, to understand the importance of the project and how it falls in the context of scholarship. I think next up, we're going to take some questions and answers, and I will send the virtual microphone back to Claudia to do that.
Thank you so much, Jen and Lisa. Wonderful presentations. Great job. Thank you. Now the Q&A. Please put the questions in the Q&A. We already have many, so we definitely won't get to all of them, but we'll answer all of them after the talk. So the first question is for you both, I think, Jen and Lisa. What are the requirements in terms of attendance, time commitments to the fellowship?
Sure. Shall I start out on that one?
Yes, please, Jen, please go.
Okay. So there are 2 talks per week typically, and a lunch. So there's a talk just for the fellows so that the fellows can all become an intellectual community, giving each other feedback, and then a public talk that is open not only to the Harvard University community, but the public at large. And then typically a lunch that everyone has together. And I would say that those are the expectations of don't miss events. But really, in thinking about whether this is the right kind of fellowship experience for you, I would say if you welcome being in community, you will get the most out of this experience. If you are trying to figure out how can I spend the least possible amount of time meeting requirements, then it probably would be a frustrating experience for you. And I found myself really diving in fully and learning from the people, learning as someone who studies emotion and decision making from a scientific run experiments perspective. I learned a lot from the novelists and poets that were in my cohort about my very topic. And so those are the requirements on paper as I understand them. But again, having a mindset of an enriched intellectual environment is the sort of implicit requirement, I would say.
Lisa, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I would just add that the group itself kind of forms specific subgroups within the group. We had a science interest group that had specialized science lectures once every couple of weeks. We had a singing group that I joined. So that also created a structure around my time doing my project in what was a very lovely office overlooking Radcliffe Yard, and created an environment of both privacy and directed thought and being in a group and learning from each other. So even though the 2 talks a week is kind of the minimum, the actual experience goes beyond those short hours for sure.
Great. The second question is, are all reviewers Harvard faculty? Yeah, Jen, maybe you can take this one.
I could, although Lisa, since you covered the different levels, maybe I'll ask you to go first.
Sure. The review committees are not all Harvard faculty. We have faculty on our committee literally from around the world, and we've used Zoom this year in quite effective ways. But before the pandemic, many of the faculty members who participated in the reviews were local local Boston-based faculty because of proximity to be able to get together. But I think with Zoom, we're even expanding beyond that. That's my recollection. Claudia, am I correct in that?
I think it's always been people from across the globe, and we actually used to fly them in sometimes. So yeah, but even more with Zoom. I mean, Zoom have made it obviously way easier. Lisa, sorry, Jen.
Yes, and I would agree. And when I've served at that second phase, I am typically reading the discipline-specific reviews from people all across the globe. And that's, I would say, the norm.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Perfect. The next question touches on the diversity about the class. And the question is, are applications from scholars 20 years after getting their PhD welcome as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And so, as I mentioned, Radcliffe is not a postdoc, but beyond that, there's a very wide range in the selection committees that I've seen, and certainly in my cohort, and an understanding that there's something to learn from scholars of different generations, and it's really part of the enrichment of the diversity.
Yes, and just, you know, maybe Lisa, you want to add something about the diversity across all parameters, like, you know, gender, race.
Yeah, I think sometimes people think because it's Radcliffe affiliated that this is a program for women. That is not the case. The non-binary women and men are all welcome to apply and welcome to be a part of the Radcliffe experience. Radcliffe was originally a women's college, but the fellowship is in no way a fellowship for women. The diversity in terms of age was wide in my year, and I think continues to be wide, including people who are many years out from a terminal degree or PhD or other terminal degree, myself included. It really was based upon expertise, talent, and scholarship within a field, not based so much upon number of years. In terms of the opportunity to interact, for me personally, with non-physicians across a wide range of ages, races, self-identified gender assignments was unique for me, because in medicine we tend to have a much more narrow, and maybe in each of our own fields, we often have very narrow perspectives. And working with videographers who were working on very difficult issues of racial injustice in the next office from me gave me an opportunity to think about the genetics research that I was doing in a new light. So that diversity is incredibly important.
Thank you both. I think that the next question is mostly for Jen, and the following one is for you, Lisa. So let's go with the first one. Do projects in social sciences have to be relevant to the Institute's focus areas, low education and justice and youth leadership and civic engagement, or can they be outside these themes?
So the latter, they can be outside those themes. The themes are suggested to try to say Radcliffe is especially interested in this, and to the extent that your work would hold implications for those themes, it's helpful to identify that. And however, if your work is not in that area, that should not be a reason to not apply. So basically, all areas are on the table, and what Radcliffe seeks is excellence. And that's really the ultimate criterion.
Thank you. The next question is, I think is for you, Lisa. Must a successful proposal in the sciences be research, or could it also be a book that attempts to convey ideas from the field to the educated public?
No, the proposed project does not have to be research. The proposed project should build on your scientific excellence in some way, if it's to be reviewed as a scientific project. So, but it could be focused on education in science or education in your area of excellence. It could be focused, as mine was, on developing a new area of expertise and developing new research in that area, but not necessarily walking in with data to be able to do a formal research project that might fit normally into sort of the regular boundaries of academic life. It can be, and this would be a discussion, but there were scientists who were moving towards creative writing. I think there was a question about that as well. And that might, if it wasn't associated with the person's area of excellence as a scientist, it might be reviewed in another group. But I would refer that to that particular question and that kind of thing to the Radcliffe staff, to Claudia, to help clarify whether that should go in as a scientific proposal where the new area really builds on your area of excellence as a scientist, or whether the new area, you're going to be a poet now, is more to be reviewed with the other poets. And that's something that I would refer to the experts.
I can add to that. So I think that based on how strongly you feel about the project and the line of the project, you should choose the area on the application. So if you are a scientist and you're doing a research project in the sciences, then you select your science and that's fine. But if you're writing a book of poems, then you may choose poetry and then as a second area of expertise, science. So I hope that makes sense. But, you know, the fellowship team will be able to, you know, go in more depth on this question if I haven't touched on all the important points. Let's get to the next question. I understand that it doesn't make sense to propose a 5-year project for a 1-year fellowship, but could a 1-year piece of a 5-year project make sense, or must it be a freestanding individual project? Jen, Jen, do you want to take this?
Sure. So in a case like that, I would encourage you to think about what the deliverable could be. And here I'm bringing in the language my students use when they go into consulting. Is there a significant piece with natural boundaries that you could say, this is the work I will do at Radcliffe, and it has a natural ending point, because let's say it's a historical research project. You're going to cover this piece of the history in country X, and you'll say, you know, to complete the full book, I'll also later be doing the history in country Y and Z. You could do something like that. The important thing there is that the unit that you carve off as the deliverable needs to have some value and meaning in and of itself. And so it's not an arbitrary cut point, like I'll get as far as I can and we'll see. So that would be my advice on that.
Mm-hmm. Lisa, do you have anything to add to that, or shall I move to the next question?
I think you can go to the next one.
Okay. Are there any limits in the number of times one can apply for the Radcliffe Fellowship? I can take that one. There isn't. Applications that have been rejected in 1 year, actually not applications, applicants that have seen their application rejected on 1 year, they have been accepted in following years. So when we get to the selection process, towards the end, throughout the process, but especially towards the end, we look at the composition of the class and we aim for diversity across all parameters. So it is possible that very excellent applications are eliminated because, you know, we need to pay more attention to diversity. So don't be discouraged if the application is not selected. The next question.
Claudia, may I add to that?
Sure, definitely.
I will say that in my cohort year, there was a person who was wonderful in the cohort who had been rejected twice before. Mm-hmm. And was a stellar member of the group. And importantly, she didn't just get rejected and then turn it around and reapply. She sought feedback from different perspectives and revised and improved it. And she talked about how important that was. And so I'd encourage people to do that kind of feedback process. And at the same time to know that there's no stigma in reapplying. And it's a great thing to do.
That's great. Could someone speak more about the expectations of fellows, about what fellow will produce during the time of the fellowship? So what are they expected to produce?
I'll take that.
Yeah.
As noted, every fellow is expected to attend the private and public lectures and hopefully to attend the luncheons associated with them. The project that you propose is something that you're expected that you will do. The changes in that project may happen along the way. You may find that your direction changes or that you develop, as Jen mentioned, a new collaboration that you didn't expect to happen that takes up a piece of your time. For me, having the Radcliffe research partners, the Harvard undergraduate students working with me, helped me redirect some of the project toward projects that I knew that they would engage in and partner with me and would be productive for both of us. So, but I think really only the required pieces are do your project, come to the 2 lectures. Claudia, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the contract, if you will.
That's fine. Yeah. The next question is the fellowship available to non-US citizens?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's open to everybody across the globe.
And Claudia, that means that Harvard will help with visas for that?
That's right. Yes, that's indeed right. The next question is about practitioners and what kind of people apply as practitioners, and do they need to have a PhD and be published writers? I don't know if you want, Jen or Lisa.
There was a practitioner in my year who was an attorney, and his plan was to write a book about his experience working as an attorney. So 1, he did not have a PhD, he had a law degree, and 2, I am not sure whether he had experience writing before, but his project was to write. I do think that the practitioner, Claudia, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the practitioner must have a plan to write something as part of their project, and that their experience as a practitioner will be informing that writing in some way. I'm not sure if the requirements get more deep than that, but maybe you can fill in there, Claudia.
I don't think so. I'm still fairly new to all of this, so I don't think so. And the question specifically asks if they need to be published writers, and that is not the case. They just need to have a writing project, proposed for the fellowship. Another question about eligibility. So let's stress this point. I understand that this is not a postdoc, but are early career academics who are more than 2 years post-PhD, but who do not yet hold the tenure track faculty position considered eligible?
So I'm happy to say the answer is yes. So people are not reviewed with respect to their positions. They're reviewed with respect to what they propose to do and what work they've done in the past. And so no one, I can tell you for sure, no one in the review process discusses what rank someone is. And the thing that we do, however, is we look at the relative quality and quantity of the work relative to the career stage. So we wouldn't hold the same standard for someone who is 10 years post PhD versus someone who is 20 years post PhD. And so we are sensitive in that way to try to consider each applicant in the best possible way relative to their work history, not relative to what jobs they hold.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think that the next question is for Lisa. If I get selected as a fellow, will Harvard find me a lab?
I think the answer to that is no. Your project should, if you want to be in a lab, if your project involves being in a lab, your project proposal should probably include identification of that lab and what the project will be working in that lab. There are many Harvard labs that have had Radcliffe fellows work with them in them as collaborators during the time that the fellow is a Radcliffe fellow, and that those have been very worthwhile collaborations, but those are identified at the time of the application or as a part of the application, the statement of what lab an applicant would be going to, what the project would be that they would be working on, and how being a Radcliffe fellow and working in that lab were the best use of the resources and the time for that person.
Mm-hmm. That's great. The next question is, does the writing sample have to be from the current research project, or could it be from a recently published book, for example?
So I think it can certainly be from a recently published book. So send us your best stuff, and if you can, send us work relevant to the project. But if it isn't relevant to the project, tell us what is informative about it. Don't be hesitant to contextualize whatever you send.
Great, yes. The next question is an interesting one. So, is the fellowship conducive to fellows with, I mean, all the other questions were as well, but this is new. Is the fellowship conducive to fellows with kids? How is the climate for families?
In my fellowship year, there were fellows, particularly from around the world, as I recall, who brought their whole family, including children, to Cambridge for the year, enrolled their children in Cambridge public schools, and had a grand time of it. I think that both the Radcliffe Fellowship Program faculty who have children are very kind and informed about that community and how to navigate the Cambridge schools and how to sort of get that done. I think that it was a great experience for the kids who walked away from a year in Cambridge speaking absolutely perfect American English. And I do think there were more than one family in our group where the kids interacted with each other. I think it's a great idea for school-age children in particular. My children were grown, but my son was a graduate student at the Ed School, which is right across the way from Radcliffe. So we had lunch together many a grand day. That was nice as well.
And I had a young school-age child when I was a fellow. And the thing that she probably remembers is that Radcliffe has the best snacks, which is really true. And so it's my personal opinion is that Radcliffe is one of the friendliest, warmest, most fully embracing of family life places within all of Harvard. And so that's a real aspect, that's a real bonus aspect of Radcliffe.
That's great. Thank you both. The next question is, to what extent is the stated plan in an application to use Harvard's resources, i.e. libraries, facilities, etc., considered in the selection criteria? I guess there is a reference to the Schlesinger Library, etc. So to which extent is considered, this aspect is considered in the selection criteria? Lisa or Jen?
I will say that in reviewing applications at the committee that I serve on, one of the pros in the pros column for a particular applicant is identification, if appropriate for that project, of a resource at Harvard that might be important for accomplishing that project. Could this project be done anywhere else? And if the answer is no, that certainly helps that particular applicant's application move forward, in my opinion. However, that doesn't mean that an applicant who doesn't propose to use specific Harvard resources or is using resources that are available worldwide but wants to come to Radcliffe for other specific reasons is not a good applicant or an applicant that will be looked at carefully. I think the Schlesinger Library is an amazing resource, and like the priority areas of Radcliffe in general, use of the Schlesinger Library, which is a resource almost unique in the world, is another one of those things that when an application is being reviewed, the reviewers take that into account among all the other elements.
Mm-hmm. There is a question about, is there any place where I can view the types of projects Radcliffe is interested in? And here I would say the website. On the website, there are all the fellows listed with their, information about their projects. But if you have anything else to add, I'm happy to hand over to either of you.
I'll just say that it's a small sample each year. And so please don't think of it as the full set. Again, I reinforce that Radcliffe wants excellence. They don't want esoteric, so different that, it's hard to know why this would matter in the world. But if you don't see a project like yours represented in a particular year's class, it doesn't mean that Radcliffe isn't interested in it.
Exactly. The next question is about the selection process. Does the selection committee choose the fellow and then the fellow is admitted, or are there other steps such as an interview?
I'm happy to say there is no interview, and that is exactly what the science prescribes, because the process is really geared toward evaluating the kinds of things that define success as a fellow, which is, can you write and synthesize and speak across disciplines? And so whether you can answer a quick interview question on the spot is not predictive of success as a Radcliffe fellow, and therefore not part of the selection process.
Mm-hmm. And the last question is transferring a J1 visa from another university possible upon acceptance? And here I can say that yes, it is possible. I guess, yeah, we are at time. So thank you so much, Jen and Lisa, for providing a great perspective on the fellowship program and delving into the details of the application process. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure.
I also want to thank you, the audience, for their terrific questions. The fellowship team will respond by email to any outstanding question that we didn't get to today. Also, please know that there is a lot of information available in our FAQ page on the Radcliffe website. Thank you again for joining us today. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.